Hello again and welcome back to our course on Adobe Dreamweaver CC. In this section, which I've called Getting Started, we are indeed going to start up Dreamweaver towards the end of this section, but I have a few things to tell you about the course itself first. Now, first of all, you may be aware that Dreamweaver is a product that's used on both Windows PCs and Apple Macs. And on this course I am exclusively going to be using a Windows PC. If you are an Apple Mac user, however, the course is pretty much fully valid for you as well though, because functionally there is very little difference between the Windows version and the Mac version of Dreamweaver CC. Particularly Mac users amongst you will know that the main differences are in things like the use of keyboard shortcuts. But the functionality of the two versions of the Dreamweaver CC program is almost identical. Now, where there are these few functional differences, I will try to highlight them when we get to that point in the course. But if you are a Mac user, you should be able to follow the course perfectly well, provided that you adapt any keyboard shortcuts and so on that I give to the Mac equivalents. The next thing I'd like to point out is that what I've tried to do in this course is to develop the use of Dreamweaver CC in a logical sequence. Now, of course, no two people going about trying to do this would come up with the same sequence, but I do suggest that particularly if you have little or no knowledge of web authoring, that you do follow the sequence in which I prepared the course, because in most sections I'm going to assume that you've covered everything in the preceding sections. You may of course get to parts of the course where it's a topic that's of little or no interest to you, and you may decide, well, I'm never going to do that, so I'll skip that bit, and of course that's entirely up to you. But you do need to be a little bit careful, because sometimes things that you think are not of interest to you may turn out to be important in order for you to be able to do something else later on. And in particular, I'd like to talk briefly about the question of code. Dreamweaver CC, as you'll see, is a very visual product, and you can build perfectly good websites without really getting involved in HTML code and CSS in detail. However, making a conscious decision to avoid those altogether is a little bit like tying one hand behind your back, and I do suggest that you try to keep a bit of an open mind when it comes to looking at HTML code and CSS. Although these can be pretty complex subjects, I'm going to introduce them in what I hope is a straightforward and understandable way. And even a little knowledge of those subjects can actually expand what you can do with Dreamweaver by a very considerable amount. So when we get to those parts of the course, please don't just skip over them and say, well, I don't want to start looking at HTML code, because ultimately it will be to your benefit if you can, as I say, get at least a small working knowledge. Now, the page that you can see in front of you now from the Adobe website is in effect the Dreamweaver CC What's New page. And if you have used an earlier version of Dreamweaver, this shows you what's new in Dreamweaver CC and gives you links to more information about each of these subjects. Many of the new features are associated with the facilities that are now available to develop websites for mobile phones and for tablets and so on. And we will be looking at those subjects on this course. And although I mentioned just now the need to keep an open mind on subjects like HTML and CSS, in order to move into some of those other devices, for instance making websites for mobile phones, we will need to move along at a reasonable pace, and I will be using the visual aspects of Dreamweaver CC the most, including some of the new tools that help you to develop websites that are flexible and that can work on a number of different devices. Now, in many ways, these are the main new features that will be most new, most unfamiliar to people who've used earlier versions of Dreamweaver. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on those very important subjects. The next thing to do is to talk about the structure of this course. I've already mentioned that I'm going to go through Dreamweaver CC in what I hope is a logical sequence. While I'm doing that, I'm going to be developing a website. And at various points in the course, I'm going to give you exercises to do. You can either use a copy of the same website. You can basically develop the same website that I'm developing. Or, and this is a much better solution, you can choose a subject of your own and develop your own website and do the same things that I'm doing, but you can develop them into your own site. The website I'm going to develop is one for a nature park, basically an attraction particularly aimed at families, where people are encouraged to come along, have a walk, look at the wildlife, and the website will feature a number of different important features. We'll certainly be looking at versions of it to run on different devices, but we'll be putting graphics, we'll be putting opening times, tables of information, many pages, all of the main features that you need to be aware of when you're building a website. Now, try to come up as soon as you can, as early in the course as you can, with a subject of your own that you'd like to build a website for. And after the first 3 or 4 sections, I'm going to set you the first exercise to do, and by that time it'd be a good idea if you've decided which subject to use for your website. Now, as I said, you can certainly use the one that I'm using and make your own equivalent of that site. Having said that, one word of warning. One of the things that I'll be doing with the site that I'm developing is to hide it from the outside world, because it will be about a fictitious park somewhere. If you are developing a website, it's important to make sure that you don't inadvertently start getting people turning up at your house thinking there's a nature park there. I'll cover that in a little bit more detail later on, but you do need to be careful about who sees the websites that you develop. Now, later on, I will explain to you how you can get the materials that I'm using in my website, and you can either use them in yours or at least see how I've been putting my site together. So, I think that's enough introductory information now. We're just about ready to start using Dreamweaver CC. Now, I'm using Windows 8, so in order to start Dreamweaver CC, I need to just find the tile, which is over on the right there, and then all I've got to do is tap on the tile. Now, the first time that you start to use Dreamweaver CC, you will see this invitation to participate in Adobe's product improvement program. I usually choose not to participate. And then you should see the Dreamweaver CC welcome screen. Now, I'm going to start the next section by talking about this welcome screen. If you're using, for example, Windows 7, then you can start Dreamweaver CC from the Start menu using the button at the left end of the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to assume throughout that your Windows or Mac knowledge is adequate to understand the terminology that I use and to do all of the basic Windows things like minimize windows, maximize windows, use scroll bars and drop downs and all those sorts of things. But the most important thing is to make sure that you know how to start Dreamweaver CC, that you can get it running, and then you're ready for the next section. That's the end of this section, and I will see you in the next one.